Hi everybody, welcome back. This is Randy Bordeaux's Tech Talks, or the rabbit hole as we like to call it. Today we're going to be talking about Azure blueprints and policies, kind of what they are, what they're used for, how can they be of use to you. So let's jump right into it, where we're going to look at basically what the policies are for. Blueprints are a way to deploy policies, among other things. So when you do your policies, they're basically governance. You can put them in and say, I want this to happen, I want to audit this, and then you can jump into Security Center and see the results of those audits. Now, it's not just auditing, right? So you can say, every time I build a resource, I want this tag added to that resource. So you can put a policy in that will enforce that. So if it's not there, it'll put it there, or it'll inherit it from somewhere else. Or say you want to make sure you have log analytics all the time on every VM you put out there. We could put a policy in place that would say every VM do log analytics and put it to this log analytics account. So you can have everything in one place, and then you'll be able to do your reports based on that, right? So let's kind of jump into the portal. And what we're going to do is look at the policies. Now, I keep the policies over here on my favorites, but if for some reason you don't have them, you can always search for them just by clicking on this search bar at the top and type in policies. All right, now we're going to jump right to it. So this is what you get, kind of the overview for policies, and it will show you where your compliance is at, how many you have that are non-compliant, what's conflicting, right? And you can click on these and it'll kind of jump into it a little bit, right? So the first thing we want to do is, I always click view all. This lets you see everything, right? And you'll see some down here are compliant, and then there's an exemption down here for something, and we'll get into those in a few minutes. But you'll see some are non-compliant. It'll say resource compliance 1 out of 3. So we can click on these and we can see that this is add a tag to resource groups, and there are 2 resource groups that are not compliant. So one thing you need to know about policies is they apply for new things, okay? So it's not going to go and add that to it if it's not newly created after the policy's been applied. But you can come in and create a remediation task, right? We want to reevaluate, we want to look at all locations, and we want to remediate. So this will go back through things that were already created and do that. Now, if we come down to assignments, this is going to show you what you have assigned. Okay, and you can click on these if you need to, and you can disable them in here. You can see who they were assigned by, dig into what they're doing, right? Non-compliance, you can have special messages about why something's not compliant, right? Now, if we go to definitions, the definitions are what it's doing, right? So you'll have definition types up here, and these can go by subscription or management group. So what we want to look at is, there's a lot of these, right? So you can come down here and find the one you're looking for, or you can create a new definition if you need to. If you create new definitions, you'll have to dig through and tell them exactly what you want to do. Now, the way I do this is, I like to use blueprints, which is a way to deploy this, among other things, right? And we're going to look at that here in a second. But if we need to build a policy definition, you just click build. We're going to tell it where we want it to be. We're going to put it on our subscription, give it a name. You can describe what it's for. You can create a new category if you want. But then you have to come in here and build this out using this structure, just like an ARM template, right? So these can get very complicated. So sometimes you may want to just import a sample from GitHub. There's a whole selection of them out there. Or you can, as you learn more, you'll go in and create your own. Right? So we're going to cancel this. And what I'm going to do is let's look at the initiative definitions. Now, these are a little bit different. This is a group of policies, right? So you create your policy definition, and then you create an initiative definition that has those policies included. An example of this is PCI, right? So if we go in here and let's look at governance. Here we go, regulatory compliance. That'll be a good one. It has PCI in here, and you'll see as we come in here, all of these policies are part of that initiative. Right? So you can apply that initiative, and it will apply all of these sub-policies to it. And then you can click on assignments, and you can see, hey, this Randy guy already applied this, right? So he can report on this stuff. Right? And then you can look at your parameters, what your allowed values are, those kind of things. So as we go down, we're going to see exemptions. Say you have an exemption, right? We don't want this to alert on our security center and bring our score down, right? So we want to put an exemption in. So I put an exemption in for having, where is it? It was having more than one owner on a subscription. You should always have more than one, but since I just use a subscription for making these videos, basically testing stuff, I don't have another owner on it. So I just clicked exemption, threw an exemption in there, and that gives me a waiver. Right? Now, those are kind of what policies do. You can configure them for a great many things. And I recommend you definitely come in here and look at what some of these are. Go in assignments. There are tons of these out there that you can look at and say, well, what do I want to do? Right? And you can break them down by categories. So if we come in here and where's a good one? Storage is always good. Well, general. Here, let's see what we got. All right, so we want to make sure audit the resource location is matching the resource group location. Custom subscription owner roles should not exist. We can prevent people from having specific kind of resources or locations. Another one is VM sizes, which as you dig in and you find as you're building your infrastructure, you'll find certain regions are a cheaper cost for what you need. So you may want to restrict people to only using those regions to help manage your costs. Another one is if you look at reserved instances. A 3-year reserved instance saves you about 73%, right? Building your VMs out. That's a huge cost savings. But the way that works is you're not reserving that virtual machine. You're reserving cores in that family of virtual machine sizes. So what you can do is you can restrict where people can only create VMs in those sizes that you have purchased reserved instances of. So say you reserve 20 cores on the DS2 size, right? You can restrict only those sizes. So when people build something, they have to pick one of those or it won't create, and then you can utilize those reserved instances rather than pay as you go. There's little tips and tricks you'll find that help manage that cost, which with Azure, as I'm sure anybody who has used this at all, you can see that you click the wrong button, you select the wrong thing, your costs can skyrocket pretty quickly. So you need to make sure you have some kind of governance and regulation in there. So let's jump into blueprints for a minute. So blueprints are a little different. They're still in preview, right? So Microsoft support is going to not recommend them for production, right? Anything in preview they don't recommend for production because it's in preview, right? It's being tested, right? So if we look at this, this is their article on Azure Blueprints, right? It's a way for engineers and architects to build out things and then deploy them, right? So I could build out my infrastructure using ARM templates and my policies and everything else, put them into blueprints, and then once we get that change management approval, and once we're ready to actually deploy, I can just publish it and assign it, and it will go do whatever it is being told to do. So they're a little bit different from ARM templates, and this kind of goes into it a little bit. ARM templates are for building your environment, right? It's for building a VM, building Kubernetes, building resource groups, those kind of things. Policies can have ARM templates in them, but they can also have policies in them. They can do all these other things, right? So that's kind of the difference, right? The blueprint is how you would deploy an ARM template, but you're not really going to deploy a blueprint with an ARM template. It wouldn't make sense, really. And the same thing goes for Azure policy, right? Blueprints are a way to deploy policies. And if you come down, this will tell you what you can have in a blueprint, right? You can have resource groups. You can have ARM templates to deploy out resources to that resource group. You can do policy assignments, and you can even do role assignments, right? So as you're building things out, if you need specific roles for specific people or security groups, then you can create those in the blueprint and have them deployed out. So you can build your blueprint and then deploy it. And once you deploy it, it can set your policies for governance, create your resource groups, create your resources, and assign security roles using role-based authentication there. So essentially, you could build everything out, deploy your blueprint, go get a cup of coffee, right? That's what they're for. You design it ahead of time, and then you build it in a blueprint, then you deploy it. Makes it a quick and easy deployment, so you don't have to sit there clicking everything, right? Now, let's look at how we actually do this, okay? There's blueprint definitions. This is where you create them. And then there's assigned blueprints, and this is where you can deploy them. And as you can see, you'll see assignments, and it'll tell you if it fails or if it succeeds. Okay, if it fails, then you can look over here and see why, right? So this one failed because I have a limitation on what regions they can go in, and the available region was not there, right? So it was trying to create something in a region that was not allowed. So the policy that's in place to prevent that, that activated, prevented the blueprint from being successful. But let's build one, shall we? So what you're going to do is you're going to create a blueprint. Now, they give you some you can start with, right? They're already kind of half built. And then they give you a blank one you can do, right? So I usually start with a blank one, to be honest, because these others I end up deleting out stuff and just redoing it. It just seems like more work to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this, right? So we're going to come in here and we're going to say this is a blueprint and we're testing something, right? And this is where I would put in something like, okay, this is governance policy, right? For production 001. And then you type what it is you want it to do. You're going to select the location. Now, if you have groups like this tenant group, you could apply it here and it would apply to every subscription, everything all the way down. Now we want to go to artifacts. blueprints contain artifacts. That's how they work, right? So as you'll see, the subscription is the top level, and then your artifact is something that goes in it. So in here, we can say, okay, we're going to do policy assignments. That's what this is for. So you can filter, you can search, you can just scroll down, or you can tell it, well, I only want to look at built-ins, and I want to look at stuff for log, right? Here we go. Deploy log analytics agent for Windows VM. Okay. Well, that's Windows. Well, what about our Linux, right? We might have Linux. So deploy log analytics for Linux VM. So this is going to make sure anything that's created in there gets deployed. Now, as you add your artifact, you'll see over here what kind it is, and then you'll see, well, there's parameters that need to be populated. You can do these now, you can do them later, all right? But you need to do both of these, okay? And then that's going to tell it where to put it, right? And then this one's optional, you don't have to do it, right? And then you just save it. And then you'll see these turned into 1 or 2, whichever one you did. Now, the other thing we can do, we want a resource group, okay? All right, so let's come down here. We're going to make one called core. And let's follow our naming scheme. So this is resource group core prod 001. Okay. And what location do we want? Well, I happen to know that West US 2 is cheap. It's about 30% cheaper. So I'm going to put that in there. And then I'm going to put my tags in here. All right. Now we'll come in and we'll say this is production. And this is core infrastructure. And this should be owner. And we're going to say this is from the infrastructure team. There we go. Now we're going to add that. Now that, you'll notice this gives you kind of a sub artifact now. So now you can do things inside that. So this is where you would add a template, right? You can add an ARM template in here. And you need to upload it. You need to upload the template, and then you need to set the parameters, right? And then you could put your description, what your display name is in here, and that would allow you to create resources within that resource group. Okay. Now, our next thing, let's take a look. You can do role assignments. So I'm not a fan of this, really. It's useful if you're trying to do it, but yeah, like we could come in here and say, well, we want contributor, and then we could search for a user, a security group, add them in there, and it would add that to it, right? Now you have to be careful because if you put it up here, that's for the subscription, and that's just going to flow down, right? But you could do it on the resource group, add everything in, and then once you get done, you save this, and it usually takes a minute, right? Now you've got this in here, right? But it's not published. So you're going to need to publish it, and you tell it what version it is, any change notes, right? And now it's published. Once it's published, you can assign it. Now, when you come in to assign it, you're going to tell it the location, if you want to lock the resources. And this is where you can set those parameters that you didn't set before. You can set them in here, and then you click assign. Now, once you click assign, on your blueprints, you'll see it come in here. It'll drop in here, and it'll tell you what happened. This is not an instantaneous process. This is something that you're going to assign it, then you're going to let it do its thing. It's going to have to work through that deployment schedule. that it does anytime you deploy out anything. And then after it gets done, you'll be able to see that it succeeded. Now, the blueprint being assigned, that succeeds. You still have to wait for Azure to do all the work behind the scenes, right? So I like to give it an hour or something. It just depends how much you're doing with it. But then you'll be able to see the policies that you applied. They'll show up, and then you can kind of go from there, right? So this one I did earlier, it took, I want to say 20 minutes, and it built out this production here, right? It's just a resource group, doesn't have anything in it, and it had some policies in there. I hope that's helpful. I hope that's kind of explained what they're for. And if you have any questions, please let us know. And if you haven't, of course, like, subscribe, check out our webpage at randybordeaux.com, and leave us comments below. Let us know what you want to see. Thank you, and come back and see us.